Michael Anton warned us in his Flight 93 essay, the American regime had lost its purpose. The people were being sacrificed to globalism and bureaucracy. America was headed for a cliff. The choice was not simply between Trump and normalcy, it was between national survival or national suicide. And now we've chosen to fight. Not for moderation or temporarily managing decline, but for rupture and upending the failed status quo. We gather, as Sean implied, at a time of great anxiety. But I'm here tonight to tell you it's also a time of great possibility. For years, we've seen America in decline. We've been told that our best days are behind us, that the people are too divided, our institutions too broken, our moral center too hollowed out ever to recover. And yet, here we are, in 2025, back under the leadership of President Trump. Not in retreat, not in despair, but in the early bracing hours of what I am convinced is a national renewal. I believe we are indeed witnessing the dawn of a golden age. Not because of one man, though he's been a battering ram through the fortress of the ruling class, but because of what this moment now makes possible. A return not just to strength or prosperity or sovereignty, as important as those are, but to the permanent things. As Russell Kirk once wrote, the conservative is concerned, first of all, for the regeneration of the spirit and the character for the perennial truths. And if anything defines this political moment, it's not some Twitter debate that's going on today. It is the hunger for those truths. We're living through the collapse of liberal technocracy. And we're told, and in fact it's true, that we're standing at the edge of something new. But I would argue it's something very old. A renewal of the American Republic, grounded not in managerial jargon or neoliberal drift, but in the principles of moral order, self-government, national purpose, and human dignity. We are not clinging to fading embers, but standing at the sunrise of a golden age, guided once more by those permanent things. This is not an accident of policy. It is the result of a people remembering who they are. But to understand this moment, we have to be honest about how we got here. The old golden age began in the shadow of a long decline, and it is important we name it for what it was: a dark age and an age of inversion. For decades, America was sold a lie that economic growth alone could sustain a nation, that liberty could survive without virtue, that cultural foundations were expendable, so long as we had stock gains and upticks in the gross domestic product. We were told that freedom meant self-expression, not self-governance, that the market could raise our children, that as long as the quarterly reports were strong, the country, therefore, was strong. But what followed simply was not flourishing. It was fragmentation. As economist Jennifer Roback Morris rightly said in 1998, neither the government nor the marketplace is any substitute for mothers and fathers. That truth, ignored by technocrats and dismissed by neoliberals, lies at the heart of our national decline. Why did our economy hollow out? Because our families hollowed out first. Because the institutions that once formed men and women of character, the church, the family, the school, the neighborhood, were dismantled by design. And what took their place? An age of inversion, where the elites told us biology was somehow bigotry, where children were sacrificed on the altar of convenience and identity, where border walls were somehow racist and drag shows were somehow virtuous, where the very ideas of nationhood, of fatherhood, of truth were treated as relics, and anyone who dissented was treated as a heretic. And so, It should be no surprise that our economy also suffered while we underwent a moral crisis. Jobs weren't offshored by accident. They were offshored because the people who ran this country stopped believing in the American people, choosing instead to believe in shareholders, not citizens, in abstractions, not America. They valued efficiency over virtue. And this moral hollowness had real consequences. From 2000 to 2016, we lost more than 5 million manufacturing jobs. Suicide rates rose 30%. Opioid deaths tripled. The male workforce participation collapsed. And birth rates collapsed to record lows. What we were witnessing was not simply the failure of policy, but the death of meaning. As my friends at Hillsdale College remind us, a constitutional republic cannot survive without moral formation. And as Claremont's Charles Kessler has written, modern liberalism's final form is not freedom, but nihilism, a politics that seeks to dissolve every boundary and displace every meaning. Michael Anton warned us in his Flight 93 essay, the American regime had lost its purpose. The people were being sacrificed to globalism and bureaucracy. America was headed for a cliff. The choice was not simply between Trump and normalcy, it was between national survival or national suicide. And now we've chosen to fight, not for moderation or temporarily managing decline, but for rupture and upending the failed status quo. Because rupture, the tearing away from the bankrupt consensus of globalism and technocracy, is indeed what opens the door to national renewal. President Trump's return is not the cause of that renewal. It's a consequence of it. He's giving voice to what millions already know, that America has been dying from a lack of meaning, and that the greatest scarcity we face is not energy or capital, but conviction. The Republican Party's political map has been redrawn, and its new coalition is reframing the terms of national debate. Working class Americans, the forgotten men and women of steel towns, farming communities, border counties, and oil rigs, those are my people, are now at the center of our movement. And the elite professional managerial class, who once claimed to speak for them, now finds itself permanently displaced. What we're witnessing is hardly a shift in coalitions or a political realignment. It's a fundamental redefinition of political purpose. For years, American conservatism was content to manage decline. Me too. I was guilty of that myself. To preserve the status quo, to offer only technocratic tweaks while the moral order collapsed around us. To vilify those of us, especially the sage Patrick Buchanan, for being overly concerned with the permanent things. But remember, friends, it's always darkest right before dawn. And here we are with all that twaddle in the past in dawn's early light. This is the dawn of America's golden age. We're not here to tweak liberalism. We're here to bury it and to resurrect something older and truer in its place. We're tasked with renewing a conservatism that is pro-worker, pro-family, pro-God, pro-nation, just as it was under Abraham Lincoln. A conservatism rooted in the American tradition, not ashamed of our history, but proud of our inheritance, just as it was under McKinley and Teddy Roosevelt, and then Reagan, and now Trump. In this renewal, we're witnessing the rebirth of what the founders envisioned, a republic grounded in virtue, guarded by borders, governed with consent and the rule of law, and guided by divine providence. And now the tide is beginning to turn. Under President Trump's leadership, America is regaining its appetite for work, for production, and for independence, for doing the hard things again. We're witnessing a return to an abundant economy that serves the American people. But let's be clear, that abundance is not strictly material. It's not merely energy, bandwidth, and delivery speed. It's not simply the latest and greatest version of artificial intelligence. We're committed to a true agenda of abundance, rooted in the permanent things: faith, family, work, worship, sovereignty, and sacrifice. The abundance that builds homes, not pods, that celebrates babies, not dual income, no kid couples, that restores local institutions and respects the dignity of working families. And we're seeing the early fruits. According to the Reshoring Initiative's 2023 annual report, at least 1.3 million manufacturing jobs have returned to U.S. soil since 2017, a trend accelerating again under Trump's second term. Onshoring is no longer a slogan. It's a national priority, fueled by Trump's willingness to challenge the status quo. Wages will likely rise for blue-collar Americans, something we saw the initial data of just yesterday, just like in his first term, especially for men without college degrees who have long been abandoned by both parties. The U.S. will soon reclaim its place as the world's largest producer of energy, slashing foreign independence or foreign dependence and restoring geopolitical leverage. And we're seeing a surge in skilled trades education, including some money that was going to Harvard. A surge in apprenticeships, and a surge in innovations that give young Americans a path to prosperity without college debt or the ideological capture by tyrants who shroud themselves in academic freedom. Let me be blunt. This is the end of wax museum conservatism. We are building things again, and this is just the beginning. Imagine a country where every man who wants to work can find honest, dignified labor, building homes, restoring roads, forging steel, protecting borders. Quite literally, builders of the Republic, just as Henry Clay imagined. Imagine a country that puts prayer back in schools, the family back at the center of our economy, and the citizen back in power. That is the future we are building, not for Wall Street, but for Main Street. And let's not forget, it is only possible because we've stopped pretending that globalization is inevitable, because we have the courage to say no and to build again, because the people are choosing to reclaim sovereignty. But no golden age is complete without peace, and no peace can endure without strength. One of the most underappreciated achievements of this political moment is the resurgence of moral seriousness in American foreign policy. After decades of drift, from utopian globalism to endless wars, we finally have a foreign policy that puts America first and wars last. Gone are the days when the United States sent its sons and daughters to die in the deserts of Mesopotamia for theories scribbled in think tank white papers. Gone is the delusion that liberal democracy can be exported at gunpoint while our own republic crumbles at home. In its place, President Trump is pursuing strategic realism. He previously brokered the Abraham Accords, normalizing relations between Israel and Arab neighbors while isolating Iran. He's bringing adversaries to the negotiating table, not with platitudes, but with leverage through the imposition of a tremendous tool of statecraft: tariffs. He's ending reckless entanglements that bleed our treasury and credibility dry. And today, he's reasserting American leadership by trying to broker ceasefire talks in Eastern Europe and restoring deterrence in the Indo-Pacific, not by appeasing tyrants, but by reminding them that America is still a lion, but a lion that chooses its battles well. But even more than peace, what the Trump doctrine restores is purpose. The founders warned against foreign entanglements not because they were isolationists, which is just a code word that K Street uses to try to save their money, but because they believed in ordered liberty at home. We defend peace abroad to protect our civilization, not to remake someone else's. As Claremont's Angelo Codevilla taught, the difference between a republic and an empire is whether we believe in self-rule. or whether we believe we must rule everyone else. This golden age is a return to what John Quincy Adams declared, that America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. This is not retreat. It's quite the opposite. It's a renaissance of realism and a recovery of moral clarity. After decades of cultural erosion and spiritual confusion, Americans are waking up to truths that were nearly forgotten. That human beings are made for community, not consumption. That children are a blessing, not a burden. That truth exists and it can be known. And that to be free, we must be good. This awakening isn't theoretical. It's taking shape all around us, in families, in towns, in churches, and in our hearts. We're witnessing the revival of tradition, especially among the young. Classical Christian schools and homeschooling are surging as families flee corrupt institutions. Marriage and birth rates after decades of free fall are stabilizing and just beginning to turn. Not everywhere, admittedly, but in the places most committed to faith and family. Conversions to Christianity are rising here in the United States and in Britain, of all places, particularly among young men disillusioned by nihilism and starving for order and belonging. And in the wake of COVID authoritarianism, millions of Americans have beautifully rediscovered localism, neighborliness, and the power of the home, especially the most important location in the home, the family dinner table. This is no longer a culture in decay. It is a culture beginning to wake up. As Hillsdale President Dr. Larry Arnn reminds us, the West does not endure because it is strong. It endures because it remembers. And we are remembering the permanent things. Michael Anton has argued that cultural renewal only becomes possible when a people stops apologizing for its civilization and starts living again. But we must go further. We must build a culture where a young couple can afford to marry, have children, and raise them on one income if that's what they choose. We must build neighborhoods full of laughter, playgrounds, cookouts, church bells, and not just dog parks. Yeah, think about that. We must rebuild institutions that tell the truth, form the soul, and honor the good. And we must never again allow the bureaucratic state, the corporate oligarchy, or the cultural commissariat to tell us how to raise our children or worship our God. The Golden Age is opening the door to a new political and cultural consensus. One that says national greatness begins with strong families and the economy exists to serve the people, not the other way around. As Chesterton said, every high civilization decays by forgetting the obvious things. A civilization that forgets how to build churches, raise families, or honor the Sabbath is a civilization forgetting how to endure. But we're remembering those things now and rediscovering that joy follows duty, meaning follows sacrifice, and indeed, blessing follows obedience. If this truly is a golden age, it will not be golden because of economic prosperity alone. And to be clear, we want economic prosperity. It will be golden because of what we were remembering. And what we were remembering are the permanent things. Kirk taught us these are the enduring truths that outlast kings and parliaments, fads and empires. They are what ground a people when everything else is in flux. Belief in a moral order, fidelity to tradition, loyalty to place, reverence for the sacred. In this golden age, these truths are no longer whispered. They are proclaimed. The foundations of a flourishing nation are not arbitrary. They are written into the nature of man and the structure of creation. Our rights come not from courts or constitutions, but from God. And our duties arise not from ideology, but from God's ordering of the universe. The recovery we seek in economics and politics and foreign affairs will collapse again if not anchored in the permanent things. This is why the left fails. They build utopias on a foundation of sand, pretending the soul doesn't matter, pretending the past can be erased, pretending that truth is a social construct. And this is why conservatism, rightly equipped and rightly ordered, will endure, because it begins with the created order and ends in the common good. Conservatism, as we like to say at Heritage, leads to living the good life, and that's what Americans want to enjoy. The genius of America, as the founders understood, was not simply its structure, but its rootedness in natural law and biblical wisdom. John Adams' well-known observation is timeless. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. That means if we wish to save the Republic, we must restore the things that make self-government possible: the family, the church, community, and conscience. Politics alone, to be clear, is not enough. It's not enough to win elections if we lose the culture. It's not enough to pass laws if we do not form souls. We don't fight for power for its own sake. We fight for the freedom to live virtuously, to raise our children in righteousness, to worship without fear, to order our lives toward the good, the true, and the beautiful. This golden age is not about elections. It's not about a political realignment. It's about remembering what is eternal and rebuilding a nation that reflects it. But the golden age is not meant for America alone. I can tell you that we're not the only nation stirring. Across the West, people are waking up, just as we are. In France, in Spain, in Britain, in Hungary, in Poland, Paraguay, and Argentina, all places I've visited recently, men and women are beginning to remember what the West once was and what it can be again. They are rejecting the false comforts of secular decadence. They're rediscovering the ancient pillars of faith, family, and nation. And they're reclaiming what is theirs, the right to exist as a sovereign people under God. As I said last week in Paris, the hour is late, but it's not too late, even for the French. Wasn't intended as a joke, but it was pretty funny. A joke I often make. The West's future will not be secured by bureaucrats or billionaires. It'll be secured by believers, men and women with the courage to kneel before God and stand before tyrants, to remember that liberty without order is chaos, and that without truth, even freedom becomes a mask for slavery. The golden age we seek must be transatlantic, not through transnational bureaucracies, but in common values and in our shared roots. This is a civilizational fight, and America must lead not because we wish to rule as an empire, but because we still remember what is worthy of protection. And of course, a golden age is not a guarantee. It's a possibility, and achieving possibilities demands courage, especially now. The enemies of ordered liberty have not disappeared. They are regrouping. They are retrenching. They are rebranding the same failed ideologies under new slogans and framing. But their goal remains unchanged: to demoralize the people, delegitimize the nation, dissolve every source of meaning outside the state and the market. We will be told this revival is dangerous, that our belief in God and family and truth is somehow authoritarian, that wanting stronger borders and strong homes is democratic backsliding, that patriotism is a threat, masculinity a disease, and motherhood a burden. We will be mocked, smeared, lied about. But if the last decade has taught us anything, it is this: the American people are not afraid anymore. As Winston Churchill would say, they've tried everything else and it didn't work. So we must be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. We must build institutions stronger than the ones we are replacing. We must catechize our children better than the culture indoctrinates them. We must form men and women of character, of courage, of conviction in our homes, in our churches, in our schools, and in our neighborhoods. The days of playing defense are over. It is time to play offense, and boldly, to challenge their institutions with our own, to outbuild them in education and media and law and in the public square, to name the lies, smash the idols, and construct a moral, political, and economic order that reflects the will of the people and the truths of nature and nature's God. It is time to save Western civilization, to recover not only what was lost, but what was never fully realized. That is the challenge, but it's also the call. And I believe truly that we and most of our fellow Americans are ready. So let me close by saying this. The American people have endured a dark age, an age of inversion, an age of cowardice, an age of control. But that chapter has closed, not because of a miracle, not because elites came to their senses, but because the American people have rejected it. They are choosing courage over comfort, order over anarchy, truth over technocracy. And in doing so, they're giving birth to a new moment, this golden age, not just a political victory, but the chance to begin again. A chance to rebuild a republic where men are strong, women are cherished, children are protected, and God is honored. A republic where homes are filled, churches are singing, and the American flag is flying. A republic where America is again the world's beacon, not because we dominate, but because we endure, because we remember. As the prophet Isaiah declares, "You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in." That is our calling, to restore the breach, to rebuild what was torn down, to recover the permanent things. And by God's grace and with our courage, we will prevail. Thank you, and God bless you. Happy to take a few hours of questions.
Unfortunately, no microphone, so just people have to speak.
Sounds good. Yes, ma'am.
Stand up.
Stand up and just project.
Thank you. Thanks for visiting with us.
Sure.
My name's Kayla. I have several questions, but I think the main one I wanted to ask is about the causal relationship between America's economic decline, as you illustrated it, versus our spiritual decline. Currently, there are about 500,000 manufacturing jobs in America that aren't filled. Manufacturing companies, their number one problem is recruitment and retention. They can't get Americans to take these jobs that currently exist. And on the other hand, there's of course been general secularization that's kind of evened out, and the Catholic Church has had some success on the edges and bringing in younger people. But I'm not entirely sure that these two things are causally connected. And I'm not entirely sure that the federal government is able to solve the latter problem. And I fear projects—
The latter problem being the spiritual one or the economic one?
Spiritual.
Yeah, sure, agreed.
I fear projects that are oriented towards the spiritual renaissance of
Free will is a powerful thing. We ought to let it do its thing.
through governmental mechanisms. So I suppose that's my question: is are these two things causally connected? I think as you portrayed, and should the federal government have some kind of hand in bringing Americans back to churches and bringing faith back into?
Thanks for your thoughtful comments and questions. I'll go in reverse order. The short answer to the second question is no, at least formally or directly, although I will say we ought to be really fastidious about using the political power we have now to fully restore religious liberty, which has been just savaged under 12 years of radical left control. And so at the very least, that needs to happen. But I'm fascinated by your first question because in a lot of ways, that's really the rub. right now in Washington for the political right, right? And that is, what's that connection? And you mentioned the 500,000 vacant manufacturing jobs. And not to be argumentative, but to put into this conversation another important statistic, which we're very worried about at Heritage, including our more libertarian-oriented economists, and that is we also have several million working-age, physically able men who aren't even looking for jobs. And that might say something about an education system that isn't preparing them for what's available. That's certainly a factor to some extent or another. I think it also says something about the meaning of manhood, the meaning of womanhood. It says something about the utter lack of belonging, which is accelerated, we know from great social science data from both center-left and center-right people. All of those are factors, right? And so to the heart of your question about the causal relationship between the spiritual decline, which is objectively true, at least in terms of organized religion, and the economic decline, which is also objectively true, that the first happened first. The United States had a tremendous economic rebirth in the 1980s and 90s, from the second year of Reagan's presidency almost through the end of Clinton's presidency. And during that time, as our economy was objectively rebounding and quarterly reports were good and GDP was good, and these are good things, to be clear, what was also happening was this continuing decline in spirit, in religiosity. And I think the final factor I will introduce is the conceit that happened because of our glorious victory in the Cold War, in which we thought we never have to confront an external enemy again. We can be focused on the economy. We're going to turn China into America. I'm positing all of those things are people with great intentions. But what we didn't attend to was what was happening right in front of us, which was a cratering marriage rate, a cratering birth rate, and the inability of elected officials or many people in public to speak to that. I want to be really clear that answering that or solving that, the spiritual or religious problem, is so far upstream of politics that that's the only way that that's going to get resolved, right? It's a matter of the heart, a matter of community, a matter of our relationship with God. But if we as conservatives say, it's not at all our place whatsoever to talk about religion in the public square, it's not at all our place whatsoever for conservatives to talk about marriage being between man and woman, it's not at all appropriate for conservatives to talk about abortion, that's continuing the problem. And what we're arguing for at Heritage is to try to solve all of those concurrently. And admittedly, and I'll conclude this, obviously I found your questions fascinating. This is the dawn. This is the beginning of being able to fix it. And no one politician, no one president is going to be able to do it. But there are green shoots in many of these factors that I mentioned that are very hopeful. And we ought to lean into that and see if that we can accelerate them, whether in civil society or in public policy. Yes, sir. John?
Your book is fantastic. It's the greatest book that any president of a think tank has ever written.
Well, I'll pay you your $5 after this is over. You're very kind.
Absolutely sorry. I love the part where you're talking about the etymology of the word conspiracy, conspiratio, elites breathing together. Now, we are constantly called conspiracy theorists by the left. They call us conspiracy theorists every day. I was wondering when you were thinking about unpacking the etymology of theorist, just as you unpack the etymology of the word conspiracy, because when we see theo, T-H-E-O, in words like theoretical or theorist, they come from this Greek word that means to gaze upon or to look at. As in the theoretical sciences like natural philosophy, mathematics, metaphysics, those are the gazing sciences where we look at an order in nature that's not of our creating, we observe it. And in fact, this is why we predicate theos, God, because God is all-seeing. God knows all. How does God know all? Because he sees all, not because he hears all, not because he hears it from another. And seeing knowledge, that's the knowledge of the philosopher, that's theos, theoretical knowledge, versus the knowledge of the man of faith, which is hearing knowledge. The sacred scripture tells us faith cometh from what is heard. or you use, I think, St. Paul's definition of faith from Ephesians in the final chapter of your book, where you say it's the hope for things that are not seen. It's the evidence for things hope. It's the hope for things, the evidence for which is not seen, heard. So hearing knowledge versus seeing knowledge. THEO, theo, theoretical.
So even though you complimented my book, you got to get to the question.
There's the question. I think that you wanted to unpack the etymology of theorists just as you unpack the etymology of conspiracy, because you are a conspiracy theorist in your
I am,
sense,
at my
in
core.
the best sense, and that you have seeing knowledge of conspiratio. When you went to Davos, you say in your book, going to Davos, and you saw the elites breathing together. So you have seeing knowledge, theoretical knowledge of elites breathing together, of conspiracy theories, and of conspiracy. And this is why I think you wanted to unpack the etymology of theorists, just as you unpack the etymology of conspiracy. But I think you thought it imprudent, because it could be plucked from the book and used against you later on. I'm wondering, am I right?
You know, there's this rule we have at Heritage. It's called the Kevin Roberts corollary. Make your comment in the form of a short question. And you did that, actually. It was a short question. Just ribbing my new friend John here. What a brilliant summary. Thanks for the compliment and for the question. I'm not afraid of the left, so I don't care what they think. We ought to all leave here or operate here, not worried about them. This is being videoed because we always do that at Heritage. We don't care. We want to politically, figuratively bury their ideology, and this is the opportunity to do it. Now, your question about etymology, as my wife would attest, I think about etymology a lot, so much so that my wife and kids call me the chief nerd. And I thought about putting it in the book. We didn't put it in there not because of concern about it being misconstrued, although it certainly would have been. The left obviously doesn't understand the value of analogy and metaphor when you're talking about burning Washington down. So we changed the subtitle because they have lost their sense of humor. But honing in on the etymology of some of those theories might be an interesting project for us. So I'll take that under consideration to perhaps publish that one day. Yes, sir.
Hi, Michael Lucchese. I'm with Law and Liberty. I have what I hope will be a brief question. I have actually many questions, but I will restrict myself to one.
You're a gentleman, Mike.
Conservatives have long warned about the administrative state, soft tyranny. They've said that it's the greatest threat to American liberty. And so my question is, many had high hopes for Elon Musk and the Doge commission.
I was hoping to avoid an Elon question today, to be honest with you.
And obviously, this is the most important question in Washington right now. So I was wondering, why do you think Elon Musk failed in the last year or so?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Great question. All kidding aside, I don't think Elon failed. $9.4 billion rescission package that's submitted to Congress, admittedly tiny drop in the bucket of the debt, is a little bit of progress. And that would not have happened were it not for Elon's great work with Doge. We'll probably, by the end of the year, get a few $100 billion in cuts that are implemented through the executive branch because of Elon's Doge work. And so I think that while obviously his tenure may be shorter than people thought, although I'm not surprised by that because Elon has a couple of companies to run, what he has succeeded in doing is altering the conversation, the trajectory, whatever imagery we want to use around fiscal restraint. Now, admittedly, we've made about 3% progress there, and we need to make 100% progress. But I'm grateful for that because in my career in public policy or as a keen observer of politics, always as a fiscal hawk, I haven't seen this kind of thing. The second thing I would say is, formally or informally, I don't know which, the Doge baton has been passed to our close collaborator, Heritage's close collaborator, Russ Vogt, the Director of Office of Management and Budget. And the advantage that Russ has over Elon, and that's not a dig at Elon whatsoever, is that Russ actually knows how the budget works. He actually knows what the systems are. And he also is not as concerned, I'll be polite about this, he's not as concerned about media and social media as obviously the owner of X might be, which means he's going to be a very good operator behind the scenes. He already is. This is all public. And so I would expect that after the reconciliation bill passes, and it will pass, that there will be additional attempts this year and early next to continue to bring that trajectory of spending down. We have to do this, right? Otherwise, we're going to go off the fiscal cliff. But I guess I would just say, politely, that I think that he's been more successful than your question posits. Yes, sir.
Elijah Parrish, philosophy PhD at UC Berkeley.
Pleasure.
Thank you for the great speech.
Speak up.
I'll repeat his question.
Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, great to hear the Buchanan shout out. Gottfried, Francis, these paleoconservatives, they're great prophets, and it's great to hear that people recognize that. You mentioned dinks and you mentioned dog parks. I'm big fans of Brad Wilcox, Malcolm and Simone Collins, Kevin Dolan, and I just wanted to ask you, what is the heritage vision of pro-natalist policy moving forward?
Yeah, great. So the great lead up to this question, but to be succinct from this brilliant question by a no doubt brilliant guy, what is the heritage policy on toward proto-natalism? We've been working on a family policy paper for 18 months. Heritage speaks with one voice, and when we have these major landmark papers, we all work on them. And we're having a dilemma. And the dilemma is that we want to see the birth rate go up. And we're even open, even at Heritage, sort of going back to one of the first questions, of government doing something. Maybe it's simply modifying some disincentives toward marriage in the existing code, but maybe even open to a limited baby bonus. But the data is really mixed. And as a public policy organization, we have to say that, right? And so where the data is more promising, but still not a slam dunk, is from Hungary. But they've spent almost 6% of their GDP on this. Are we prepared at a time when, as we sit here, when we leave tonight, we'll be about $36.5 trillion in debt to do that? It's a question of trade-offs, as all questions in public policy are. Our position is that we're philosophically in favor. We're about halfway there in articulating a specific policy, but we haven't figured out a recommendation yet. Now, there's risk in the president of Heritage, the largest conservative think tank, in saying that. But we operate with humility, not hubris, in saying, we're trying to figure this out. This is a big civilizational problem. I happen to think it's existential. There are friends on the political right who don't care about this because they believe, one example, I want to steel man their argument, that it's less of a problem because we can, through good legal immigration system, replace those people. I disagree with that. I respect the position, but I disagree with it. Heritage, when we're at our best, puts all of those equities together, but we come at this from the standpoint of limited government, but also understanding there won't be a government or a civilization if we don't fix the problem. So we're going to keep pressing. Yes, ma'am.
So I agree with you about your sentiments about the direction the country is going in, and I do agree that the mandate of the election was a powerful sign of how the population feels. However, I'd like you to elaborate on this rhetoric of let's just dunk the left. In terms of permanent,
no, I don't want to dunk them, just to be precise. I want to bury their ideology and their political power.
Yes, so in terms of the permanent things, I'm hearing a lot about tearing down. I'm not seeing a lot from the administration about building up, and I understand your sentiments, but I'd like to give you an opportunity to expand on what exactly is being built to replace these things that we're tearing down.
Sure, good question. So barbarians are inside the gates. They're presidents and most faculty at most universities in the United States. And figuratively, those institutions need to be torn down or reformed. And conservatives for too long have been sending their money to their alma maters sort of blindly, and not looking at with a constructively critical eye the indoctrination that has happened there. Harvard gives us this great example, but we could go on and on about the examples at places that are less prominent than Harvard. And the building that's happening is outside the realm of government, which means it's even more important. It's even more organic. It's even more long-term. I think about the spate of classical schools, for example, of all religious backgrounds. They and homeschooling are the fastest growing segments in education. We also have a very promising segment of public schools, and I think this is important as a conservative who only went to public schools, of charter schools that, of course, are funded publicly and have curricula that resemble those classical schools. In other words, getting at the truth. So there's a lot of building that's going on. My worry in the education world is that we can't build enough colleges to replace those that are so problematic just because of the nature of the difficulty of the business model. And I think the success of this project, of this century, or of this generation, if we want to look in 25-year terms, isn't even so much about how many elections political conservatives win, or how many institutions that have been captured by the left, as Gramsci correctly predicted, are reformed or closed. It's really going to be, to the heart of your question, how successful we are in building new ones. And that's why Heritage, for example, in addition to its work on public policy, has started investing some of its endowment in actually doing that institutional renewal. Along those lines, just one more point. You can tell I think a lot about this, so I'm grateful for your question. There's a wonderful article in the Wall Street Journal today, about Leonard Leo. He's a great friend and a great man who is doing precisely that with the treasure that the wonderful American Barry Side left him. If we're doing that as conservatives, then I'm actually very optimistic that in 25 to 50 years, there will be a lot more institutions just in this arena that I focused on of education that reflect truth. And I'm more optimistic about that than I've ever been in my life. Isaac?
Thanks, Dr. Roberts. Great to see you again, and thank you for the shout out. My question is, can you speak a little bit about the relationship between conservatism and wonder or beauty? And how do we reinstill in the next generation seeing the beauty in the traditions that we've been handed down? Or sort of succinctly, how can I make sure that my 9-month-old son in 10 or 20 or 30 years sees the same beautiful things that I see in conservatism that my father, who's actually sitting right next to me as well, handed to me? Thank you.
Thanks. Isaac, you remain so brilliant and eloquent. Two things, although there are many factors, and obviously such a great crowd would be able to offer some excellent examples too. The first, in the realm of civil society, is one of the things I'm implying, trying to get at when I talk about revitalizing families. It isn't just for the social science data of the success sequence, which of course our friend Brad Wilcox does a great job of explaining. It isn't just for the religious formation, which is important to many of us. It's that there is a transmission of cultural goods that happens from father to son, from mother to son, and so on. And we have to have a society in which the family is being revitalized, but even the families that look like they're stable, long married, husband and wife, and that isn't possible for everyone. If you read my book, you know I know that, given my childhood. But husband and wife, 3, 4 children, but if they're not spending time eating family dinner at least a few nights a week, the ability of that family to transmit those values that you described is limited. We know that from Brad Wilcox's research. We know that from Mark Regnerus's research. That's the most important arena in which this can happen. But I will also tell you, as a conservative and not a libertarian, that government has a role in this. Government absolutely has a role in this. If I had a magic wand and I could get Congress to do something tomorrow, well, I get Congress to cut a lot of the deficit debt, okay? But if it weren't that, I would have Congress reclaim its constitutional authority over Washington, D.C., because the mayor is a communist. Well, I'll stop there. It's Eastertide, and I'm still trying to live out my Lenten penance of being charitable in my words. She's ineffective in very obvious things like public safety. But she has no vision for what Washington, D.C. should be as an icon of the civic beauty that a great civilization should have. And so sometimes I get picked on by the left-wing media. I'm told, I don't read their outlets, but I'm told that they don't like that I like Hungary and Budapest and Viktor Orban. And the thing that inspires me about Mr. Orban more than anything else is his revitalization of national identity through civic architecture. The very stark example of wanting to get rid of all of those Soviet buildings, very passionate for him because he was the student leader that led the effort to throw off the yoke of the Soviets in the 80s. But It is required billions of dollars of investment by a tiny country of 10 million people. We ought to spend money to do that in Washington, D.C. So Heritage, among the other things that it does, is calling for this. Our Vice President of National Security and Foreign Policy has a PhD in art history. She's also very good at foreign policy, but she's part of this. So we've got to do both. We have to do what is in civil society, but government also plays a role. And finally, I would say something I learned at Wyoming Catholic College as the president. We ought to love poetry. We ought to read poetry. We ought to recite poetry. And go to Lander, Wyoming, and start the line of a poem you know. There's about a 100% chance that the students will recite it along with you. That beauty, the beauty of great art, the beauty of great music, these are the things that Americans are drawn to when they're given that opportunity. And sometimes government must play a role, like including those things in school curricula. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. So you quoted the Founding Fathers, you quoted John Adams, you quoted John Quincy Adams, but you also quoted Michael Anton. And Anton is famous for saying that the Federalist Papers are like a owner's manual for a car that has gone off the cliff. And so the very fact that the car is now in the ditch somewhat evidences that there was some kind of flaw or imperfection in the original order. And so my question is, what basic change or improvement upon our constitutional order needs to happen so that we don't get in this situation again?
Man, what a great question. Look, the great thing about being in the conservative movement most days is that you can have these great friends like Michael Anton and then also civilly disagree with them about certain things. And we disagree on the Federalist Papers. But where we agree mightily, and we've talked about this, is that the flaw in the order, to use your good framing, is actually this issue of spirituality, religiosity, or morality. That's the missing ingredient, or the ingredient that has become a lot less potent. And that's why I think it's so important for us to revitalize that in the different ways we would. Your question about the Constitution, I would probably eliminate, if I could, 1 or 2 amendments. Probably, I would eliminate the direct election of senators, because I actually think senatorial representation would be better, and ironically, the people would have a more influential voice over their senators if state legislatures chose them. And I would eliminate the income tax, and I would replace it with tariffs. It worked for so long. I want to be really clear. That's Heritage's position. We could accept tariffs fully. We're sort of halfway there if they're more reciprocal. But you got to do a whole other set of things. You got to reform the whole tax code. If that's where we're going, sign us up. It makes a lot of sense, but the chances of that happening are probably pretty slim. Yes, ma'am, all the way in the back. Thanks for being patient.
Question about your paper on pronatalism.
Yes, ma'am.
It's taking a long time because you want to come up with a complete paper with position and what to do. What about this idea? Write the paper and end it with, you got any good ideas for us? And let people begin to think about it and start the conversation.
I love the way you think, ma'am. I really do. And to
Tell me why I'm wrong.
I'm a Southerner. I was trained to disagree politely, but I'm not disagreeing with you actually. I wanted to put some wind in your sails and say we're flirting with what to do about that. Like, we're giving 7 figures away from our endowment. The last 3 years, we just announced winners of these innovation prizes, of creating an innovation prize just for that, and inviting all of the voices from our sometimes friends at Cato to our all the time friends farther to the right to be part of this. And we think that might be something that Heritage can do with its convening power. And so I actually really like your idea, and we're pondering this. We're going to publish this paper, but it's going to be one of these papers where it's sort of an assessment of what the factors are as we see them. And to my point about trying to operate in humility and not hubris, say, we haven't figured this out yet, and maybe we can do that in conjunction with your idea. So thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Of course.
And thank you for the wonderful talk. A concerning trend in America, not only the moral hollowness that you mentioned, but moreover how that moral hollowness has been presented to Americans, is in the cultural transformation of media. Many Americans don't want to be informed unless they're actively being entertained. Short-form content rules. No one even watches TVs anymore. We have little screens at our gas pumps because the 2 minutes...
And they are awful.
Yes, but people still watch them. My question is, all of the information, all of the great works have been digitized and put on the internet for free. So it's not like Americans don't have the tools to access beauty, but how do we inspire and revitalize an interest in permanent things when many Americans only conform such fleeting forms of media?
Great question. And I think people heard in the back, but the question is about how do we get Americans to consume these beautiful things, given that there seems to be, over a couple of generations, a declining interest by Americans in those things. This is why I think institutions are so important. This is why I think those institutions that not only aren't doing that, but actively undermining that, are not just worthless, but harmful. And they should be cut off the public dole if they're not following the stipulations. But more importantly, let's not forget the power that we have as individuals. That sounds very trite, but it really is leaning upon part of the strand in conservatism of localism, of making sure that we ourselves are advocates for this. That in our daily behaviors, I mean, truly in our daily behaviors, but in interactions we're having, maybe in more professional, secular settings like a Rotary Club, we're talking about these things. If that's happening, we're renewing institutions. Public policy reflects that. We have a president, whether you love him or hate him, who builds beautiful things and loves neoclassical architecture. This is an opportunity for us, maybe more than in any other aspect of what I believe is a golden age, to really take advantage of the moment we're in. And then the last thing I will say, we're proudly, philosophically conservative at Heritage, but we are truly nonpartisan. There are plenty of Republicans who do not like us because we tell them that they aren't conservative enough. So I mean this. It also has tremendous bipartisan support, ironically, because Americans like the way that sounds, but they don't necessarily know it. And so how about the greatest part of revitalizing this republic is revitalizing this love and appreciation for the beautiful things. I'm gonna go to someone that hasn't asked a question. Yes, ma'am, Sarah.
Thank you. So I have a brief preface to this question, which is more of an invitation to you to comment on
Thanks.
the area of public policy. I'm a scholar of Tocqueville. Tocqueville is well known for his hatred of the administrative state, soft despotism, et cetera, it's already been mentioned tonight. And yet Tocqueville was himself a politician as well as a philosopher. And if you go into the depths of his actual political writings, you find things that are quite interesting, and it sits somewhat uneasily with his, with what you read in Democracy in America. For instance, he addressed the question of abandoned children in France. Right? There are all these children who are being abandoned as a result of the Industrial Revolution. And he weighs this issue of, well, is it just and fair to give money to single moms so they can keep their children when we're not necessarily giving money to poor families?
Right.
Right? And so he has this kind of complicated report where he's evaluating these two. And surprisingly, he comes down on the side of giving money to the single moms, with the argument being that it's better for a child to have some kind of family identity than to be a ward of the state. Right? He says we don't want to produce proletarians in our children. Right? So this is not an ideal scenario, but it's the best that we can do under the circumstances. And I keep that in mind as, well, here's someone who's very principally, has a principled objection to soft despotism in the administrative state. And yet, when faced with actual political realities, has to do the best with what he's given. And I try to bear that in mind when I, from my position at Catholic, watch what's happening in DC. And so I would just like to invite you, whether it's on the pronatalism question or a trade policy, to comment on a place where there's been some kind of wrestling or some kind of struggle with maybe what the principles of conservatism abstractly would recommend versus doing what's best possible in a given concrete situation.
Thanks so much for that question. All these questions have been wonderful. Being such a fan of and student of Tocqueville, I'm particularly grateful for yours, Sarah. So I'm going to talk about entitlement reform. It's actually probably not the best example I come up with. I actually think the pro-natalism paper is, but we've talked about that. So in the interest of covering more ground, I'll talk about entitlement reform relevant to the reconciliation bill, but I don't really mean these comments to be about so near term. There's tension in the center-right movement, which includes everyone from the center to libertarians to conservatives of all stripes, about the scope and scale and expense of our entitlement system. And for us at Heritage, especially thinking about the issue of the birth rate, we believe that both probably need to happen. In other words, just to use Tocqueville's categories, that single moms with children, we wish were married for a whole bunch of reasons. They're maybe unmarried because of things that other people did, right? But it is better for those children to be raised by mom than by anyone else. And yet, swerving into the reconciliation debate, which is a live fire exercise right now, the debate is thinking about Medicaid, which all of these mothers by definition would get, or almost all of them. And we have 9.6 million men of working age, able-bodied, who are receiving Medicaid. Now, politically, there are some elected leaders who believe that those 9.6 million men are such an important part of their political coalition that they don't want to touch that. But for us at Heritage, you must, because eventually you will, through the federal budget or worse, through society and culture, which we already are. And so we believe really good reform of the entitlement system to make whole those people who really deserve it, using that word somewhat loosely, is much better and actually breeds trust in that system. The second category, which gets into the natalism paper of families giving them some sort of baby bonus, although we haven't figured out the numbers on this, we're building a model for this at Heritage. We are huge proponents of a lifetime savings account. I don't want it to be called anything having to do with the federal government, but from birth through rolling in 529 plans, through Social Security, if it's part of a larger entitlement reform. And I'm not doing a good job in this response of talking about some explicit tensions, maybe because we try to work through those at Heritage. But those are some examples of where I know the conservative movement will have to wrestle with itself about what we do, and to invite another vector in this, although you did mention it, the political realities just in our own realigned coalition create real tension on this. And resolving that or not resolving that will have a disproportionate impact on the durability of that coalition. So thanks for the question. We've got time for one more question. Yes, ma'am. I'm very patient.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
My name is Savita. I'm from Assumption University. I'm an undergrad, so I'm not a serious academic, so I won't have a long
come on now.
Question.
You're giving us way too much credit.
Okay. So you use the phrase golden age often in your speech, and I'm wondering if it's too optimistic to say.
Oh, come on now.
Too early to say. I'm not trying to like, sweep this under the rug or anything like that. I think we should be a little bit more cautious with the terms that we use, because who's not to say that a Democrat could become the next president? Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
So,
I understand it's a possibility.
So, yeah, I just think it's too optimistic.
Fair.
And I wanted to give you an opportunity to sharpen this, or maybe make it a little more clear.
Okay, thanks for your question.
Thank you.
It's a very fair question, and it is early. I'm going to double down on it, but not out of disrespect for your question, because you could be right and I could be wrong. Maybe I'm optimistic because of some generational factor. As a Generation Xer, this is a compliment to your generation, by the way. I'm not going to be the bald white guy who, is a screed on young people. Meaning that as a son of the Reagan Revolution, there was great hope. And we won the Cold War. And we thought that was America's golden age. And for a while it was. And then we realized by about the early 2000s, corresponding with what I now understand to be a wrong-headed, poorly intentioned invasion of Iraq, that America was in decline domestically. And so to see these green shoots in these areas that I talked about make me very optimistic. You may be right that it's too early to call it a golden age. I happen to think, based on that perspective and data that we look at Heritage, that this absolutely could be the beginning of it. But time will tell, in fairness to your question. And I think all of us have to have, starting with myself, the humility to say when we're wrong. And so there was a time when I had to call someone who's in this audience who had been telling me in 2003 and 2004 that the neoconservative project of invading Iraq was wrong. It was morally evil. And he's standing right there at the back of that door, Winston Elliott. And it was in 2011 when I decided to cancel my subscription to the Weekly Standard, which I write about in my book, that the next day I called Winston and I said, "You were right." And he said, "I know, what took you so long?" Some humor there, but a real story. And whether, I'm not suggesting that you will have to call me, I might have to call you, but that as conservatives in this moment of uncertainty and fractiousness, at the same time that we must be sober about some still challenging realities, that how about we don't always engage in worst case scenario thinking, but best case scenario thinking. And that's where I am. So thank you. Thanks for having me today.
The Kevin Roberts Show is brought to you by more than 10 million supporters of the Heritage Foundation. The executive producer is Crystal Kate Bonham. Sound design by Lauren Evans, Mark Guiney, Tim Kennedy, and Joseph Fonspakowski. For more information and to subscribe, please visit heritage.org.